Dan, a lot of people are afraid, a lot of landlords and property managers are afraid to implement the stringent processes and systems and the discipline that you have in your operation for fear that they'll leave a place empty for some period of time and they won't be able to generate income and maybe service their own debt. I've always felt that that was a mistake, that it's better to have an empty unit than a unit full of bad tenants. What is your take on that, and how's that impacted when times are good for landlords and times are bad for landlords? In other words, it's a great market today to be a landlord, but it wasn't necessarily a great market a couple of years ago.
Sure, absolutely. Well, let me give you this analogy, and I heard this actually yesterday at a leadership training, and this goes back to understanding the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge, for example, is knowing that a tomato is a fruit and not a vegetable, right?
Right.
Wisdom is knowing that you don't put a tomato in a fruit salad. Okay? So there's a difference between having knowledge and having wisdom and applying the wisdom to your investment property. And what I mean by that is very simple. If you own rental properties and you know from a knowledge standpoint that eventually you're going to have vacancy expense, but you don't use the wisdom to pre-plan for that and apply sound principles, you're going to end up putting a tomato in your fruit salad, and it's going to taste horrible. That's the same rationale you should be running your investment properties with, is using wisdom. By having principles in place, by having screening principles and rules and these set guidelines in place, what it helps you do is it helps you get a stiffening of the vertebrae for when those tough times are here. And here's an example of a landlord who is one of these deals that we inherited. The landlord put the tenant in the property themselves. They literally took 1 month's rent value in cash from the tenant, stuck them in the property because they had to move out of town real quick. No photo ID, no background check, no security deposit even, Matt, if you can believe that. But these landlords do that. They get desperate. So he gets into trouble with this tenant for not paying rent for 2 or 3 months. He gets referred to us by one of our referral partners here in town. And then she calls me up and says, this guy's way in over his head. He doesn't know what he's doing. So we take him on. We advise him. Well, we're evicting him now. As a matter of fact, I believe your associate, Drew Strobel, is doing the eviction for us. He is now understanding what we tried to explain to him 6 months ago would happen with this tenant. And we predicted it because he made poor decisions using poor principles and poor rules of engagement. So he's having to learn that lesson the hard way, and now he's going to have to evict the tenant, pay the legal fees, pay us to find a new tenant, and probably have the property vacant for maybe 3 weeks or 4 weeks. Had he applied these same principles up front, he probably would have had 3 to 4 weeks of vacancy expense up front, but he would not have had attorney fees. He would not have had the property probably damaged when this tenant leaves. He won't have the absolute stomach acid he's had to have for the last 6 months of dealing with this tenant of no pays and late pays consistently. So that has value. You always, always, always want to get into an investment scenario knowing how am I going to operate this, and most importantly, how and why am I going to operate this property, and what's the end game. And he unfortunately didn't have that strategy in place. So when you don't have rules of the game, you don't know how to play it. So, yes, it's easier to operate a rental property without sound principles of tenant screening. I can tell you every single time there is no good way to war game yourself out of it because you will always be chasing some money somewhere, and it's always more expensive to push a bad position with a bad tenant.